Welcome back to The Navel Gaze. I am Aaron Terrell. Tallybots over there is my co-host, and we are super stoked to be joined by Frankie today. Frankie, like myself, identifies as an autoandrophile, but just has, and I think we want to talk to you about that, of course. And then also, we're really excited to have you here just because you actually have extensive experience in kind of like the sex kink scene, and especially amongst other trans people, especially FTMs. And so we're really stoked to talk to you about, all you've seen and learned through your professional and personal experiences there. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super stoked to be here and to talk about this. I was previously known as Sid6 when I was working in the adult industry, the adult trans industry. And while working in that industry, I observed so much transsexuality. So I'm stoked to talk about that.
Awesome. Can you tell, how long were you in the sex work sphere?
Yeah, so I like to say 6 years because that's kind of when I started doing it more on my own volition. 6 years of being like a pro dom and in the like trans porn industry.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, and I think we need to do a little get to know you involved here, because for me, you kind of just recently popped up on the scene, and I know you recently spoke with Phil, our good friend of the show, Phil Illy. And so from what I understand, you recently made the choice to stop sex work, to sort of leave the industry. And I guess that's sort of when I don't know how you fell into the gender critical sphere. I think you are you're an interesting person to talk to because I think you kind of have maybe 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the queer community, or you don't have the same sensitivities, I guess, as some of the people that you've spent many years in community with. And so, I guess I want to know, I want to know a little bit about your transition, for lack of better terms, your like trans identity as far as that goes. And when you kind of came to the conclusion of like, I'm a female, I don't really care what people call me, here's how I conceptualize myself, and here's how I figured out that this is really kind of actually a manifestation of my sexuality. So that was a lot of questions, but if you could kind of walk us down that road to start off, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with my first memory of cross-dressing.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to be 11 or 12, right? And that's when like these cross-dressing feelings came online. And my sexuality, my attraction to women didn't come online until I was maybe 13. And then, oh my God, I would be obsessed with tricking people on MySpace into thinking I was a boy. And that was I don't know if it was sexual because I was so young, but it was definitely sensual. Like it definitely made me excited, right? So that's kind of also when my obsession with taking photos of myself began, and my reflection, and just being really into looking at myself dressed as a boy. I just kind of always had a internet presence, which like I started modeling when I was 16, which was also connected to non-consensual sex work. I was sex trafficked starting when I was 15. And I got away from that probably when I was around 19. And then that was the first time I had quit sex work. I returned to sex work after I broke up with my ex-fiance and began my transition. And my second time returning to sex work was very complicated because now I had this extra layer of being trans and navigating the trans community and navigating what I felt like was dysphoria. And then still continuing in these kink spaces because I was a pro dominatrix when I was a woman. And I made a lot of money as a young dominatrix. So I think that's kind of why I call this my repressor era. I like leaned into femininity super hard because it was just so profitable. I hated it. I felt like a drag queen. I didn't, but funny enough, I still can look at the old porn and it does make me uncomfortable because I remember a lot of traumatic memories when I look at it. But I'm sexually attracted to that woman. I used to just dress as a woman that I would want to fuck. So when I was presenting as a woman, it was still very autosexual. And I feel like just looking on my sexual history, it's so autosexual, truly. I feel like I'm missing one question. There was another question here.
Well, okay, I'll ask clarifying questions. You already said so much that I want to get into. I can already see how I'm gonna struggle with the time limit and not derail too much from Aaron's goals for this conversation. But okay, so you said that when you started sex work for the second time, and maybe for the first time really consensually, or the first time that whatever, I guess you made an adult choice to get into it. You said that was when you came out as trans. What were you identifying as? What when you came out, what came out as what? Transitioned in what way?
So I was already socially out with my friend group as non-binary since I was 15 or 16. And then I went back to she, her, being a woman in the dark sex industry years. Because like no one, when you're an escort, no one's going to call you they, them. So I just kind of put that to the side, right? You know, I'm not going to make a client call me they, them. So I then got engaged to someone as well. I was a woman, quote, but also I was just, I told them that I didn't really feel like a woman. And then it was after that breakup that it kind of just hit me that I felt like I was pretending. I was lying. I felt like I was a drag queen. It kind of just all hit me. And this was 2020. So I was also just not working, not in school, not really around people. So once I had to like sit with myself and stopped putting on the face paint every day and the fishnets and the heels every day, once I wasn't forced to perform femininity daily, I realized it made me deeply uncomfortable. So then I came out as non-binary. I started dating a woman and she was like, "You're just non-binary for attention. You don't actually mean it." And that's what kind of kick-started me into like just hitting the trans community running, right? I broke up with her and I started dating a trans man. And oh my God, I was obsessed with him. I think that was the moment. Like he was my artifact of my not AGAMP. It's the other way around. It's AAGM. Yeah. That I think was the moment that I was like, oh my God, like I'm obsessed with your body and I want your body. Because I always kind of had these feelings of being masculine and cross-dressing and just already performing masculinity. Like I was always topping my partners. Like when I had a male partner that I was engaged to, I was still the top. So I, like in most of my like sex in my personal life, I didn't want to be penetrated. I didn't even like receiving oral. I didn't like anyone near it. The only way I could let anyone near it was like if I was really drugged out. I was like an alcoholic. I'd have to get fucked up to perform. The only time I could let a male top me was if I was under the influence. And that's kind of what kept me in that really bad cycle. And so when I returned to porn, I relapsed. It got me back into the cycle of having to get like fucked up to do those things on camera. So came out as non-binary twice and then came out as a trans man shortly after I dated that trans man. That's like, because I didn't know you could be a trans man. Like the moment I saw that you could do that, I knew. I was like, oh my God, you can take testosterone. Like, can I have some? Like,
So, but you grew up in San Francisco, right? Like how did you not know that that was a possibility?
I repressed it. So like I actually went to high school with pediatric transitioners, and I just told myself that's not me. That could never be me. And I just kind of like put it in the back of my mind. I was like, I'm not. That could never, because I don't know. I saw them and I was like, I'm not whatever that is. I don't have the like classic, I want to be male. So because like my friend Bunny was always like, I want to be male. I want to be just like the boys. I want to be on the boys sports team. I was like, oh, I'm not a trans man. Like I'm non-binary. And then it just
felt like you weren't true trans, so you couldn't be like them. It's interesting. There's like another trans mask AAP person on Twitter who, this is like his artifact, is just like complaining about how he's not true trans and how like he doesn't deserve to call himself trans because he's not HSTS and he wasn't a childhood onset and he wasn't a youth transitioner, and so he's not valid. And he's ruining the world for for the real trans men. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I agree with Aaron. I was gonna say, like, I don't know exactly how much it's gonna pass muster that you like knew what non-binary was, but not what a trans man was. But it does make sense to me that like really coming in close contact, being in a relationship, seeing the changes on the body, because it really kind of is, especially maybe if you're seeing either the pediatric transitioners or the people who are kind of doing the non-binary. How should I call this? The Tinos, the trans in name only, like the people who aren't medicalizing, what's the word I'm looking for, Aaron? The too cutes and stuff. So I could see how, like, if that's your exposure in a very progressive area, it is kind of a different story to get up close and personal with a masculinized female body.
Well, because he was also an adult transitioner. So like I started T at 22, and I just kind of, I thought I missed the boat. I thought because my friends transitioned 15, 16, that I just kind of missed the boat entirely. So when I met a trans man who was transitioning at 30, I was like, oh, I could just do that? Cool. Yeah.
Which it's also interesting to me. It's sorry, you can pick up after this, Tully. But you were in a relationship with obviously a biological male, and you didn't have that feeling of I wish I had your body. You didn't have that feeling until you were with a trans man. Is that correct? I wonder if that has some bearing.
Weirdly enough, I did always have that feeling of like I'm a gay boy when I was with the male, but he was an AGP. So like when we were having sex, we were like really leaning into gender play.
Right.
So I think that's why I didn't have that problem with him.
That's interesting. That makes sense. Like you were the masculine one in the dynamic. Yeah. What I was going to say, it was much less productive than what you just said, Aaron. I was just going to say that this is like a severe, like generational divide and brain rot. Not to disrespect Gen Z and like millennials too, and I'm a millennial. But the idea that like 22 makes you like an old washed up adult transitioner is insane. So? But yeah. Oh yeah, I do. I think transitioning at 25 is like young. Like, wow, you got on that. Yeah. Like, wow, yeah. But then again, you're comparing it to people who are coming out and transitioning at 15 and 16. Like when I'm not that much older than you, but in my high school, there was one person who came out. There was one, trans woman who came out like our senior year. So yeah, this phenomenon didn't exist. People who transitioned did so later on, as in their early adulthood, right? So that's a really interesting, and I don't know what to make of that dynamic. Like, I guess if it prevents people from medicalizing who don't need to medicalize because they feel that they're not true trans because it didn't hit them when they were 12, then I guess that's a good thing. But there's something like there's some brain worm involved in this that
it's definitely brainwormed. I mean, I feel like I had kind of the opposite effects in a weird way. Like when I did come out as a trans man after dating that trans man, he told me he's a transsexual because he has a male brain. Mm-hmm. And when he told me that is when my dysphoria just became life ruining. Like I was like, oh, I've always had these feelings of gender, like nonconformity. I've always been cross-dressing. And he was like, oh, you probably have a male brain too. And then I just got super into like, I need to be true trans. I need to take the maximum dose of testosterone right now. I need to get top surgery immediately. And like the true trans narrative like pushed me to medicalize super quickly. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like honestly like going off of tea. Like I've been on and off of tea for the past year. And because I realized I don't want to go all the way, right? But because of the true trans narrative, I thought I had to go all of the way. Like if I didn't get bottom surgery, I was fucking faking it. So I was like contemplating bottom surgery because I thought that would make me a real man. Like the only thing to make me truly a real trans man was to go all of the way. Mm-hmm. And I've since announced that. Like I don't feel the need to be fully male. I feel really comfortable being a masculinized female now. I've kind of just, since I've let go of the like trying to convince myself that I had a phantom penis and stuff like that, I feel like I've gotten way less dysphoric.
Yeah, I do think that the transmedicalist narrative does, kind of manufacture dysphoria where there doesn't need to be any. And I think if we can, cut through that, stop people from, going into some bodily harm areas that are completely unnecessary, that are just, they're not going to improve their mental well-being. They're not going to improve their lives. It's just going to be, kind of unnecessary medical harm. And if we understand, what our motivations are in this, where the stress is actually rooted, that can be avoided.
Yeah, definitely. Like I feel like if I did actually get bottom surgery, it would have been a huge mistake. So I'm glad that I've kind of just accepted the autoandro gynomorphophilia because it feels so comfortable. Like it just feels, I'm like, oh, okay, there's other people like me. This is a thing that happens, and it's actually totally fine that I like being a masculinized female. And since I've just accepted that this is a thing that happens, I've been way less dysphoric.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. How did you snap out of the sort of transmedicalist maximalist approach that you were taking? How did you come to terms with being a masculinized female?
I had a life-shattering moment in the trans community where they kind of disowned me. It's when the cults just turned on me, right? I hate calling it the cult, but I had the realization that trans women will always be male and trans men will always be female after I was sexually assaulted by an AGP in a trans household. There was 6 trans people living in a house, and we were all AFAB until this fucking AGP came. And then it was just blaring in my face that this is a paraphilic male. And then I really hated this person. I called her an AGP, and then they kicked me out of the house for being transphobic. And that's when I realized, oh, they will protect literal rapists to defend this narrative that trans women are always women. And that's when I kind of realized, like, this was male on female violence. And this woman, this AGP, had also sexually assaulted 2 of my friends who are also trans-identified females. And I was like, yeah, I don't vibe with this narrative anymore. I'm a female on testosterone, and it's fine, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, well, that's terrible. I'm sorry that you went through that experience. I wonder where you were in your process of understanding your own sexuality at that point, because it is always interesting. Like, autosexuals do often use these words as weapons against each other. So it's interesting that, like, to hurt this person, instead of even saying like you're a man or you're a male, it was like you're a dirty paraphile, you're an AGP. And then that hit exactly like you're saying. All of the people in the trans cult, or the people in the community, or whatever we want to call it, they know AGP as a slur, right? As a way to sexualize and delegitimize trans women. But there are, I know, and we've interviewed on this channel like several other autogynephiles who that was also their like peaking moment, was like seeing, really realizing that some of these trans women are very masculine because they're male, right? Like, and I think where Aaron and I come from is like we're like kind of really over a lot of like the euphemistic language and stuff. Like, we don't say AFAT. We're not telling you what to say or anything. We don't do the AFAT. Like, there's just females and males, and we're okay, frankly, with adults altering their body to live in a way that's going to make them more comfortable. I've come to, and I think Aaron, well, I know Aaron too, but this is where we then end up landing at in just a position where like we make no one happy, because we don't satisfy the gender criticals who basically believe that like transition is always immoral, it's always harmful. We think that adults should be able to do this and that they're not actually hurting anyone. We don't believe that cross-dressing is hurting anyone. But along the lines of what you were saying about like this idea that if to be truly trans and truly a man, you would need to go all the way. That's why I think basically the legal standard needs to go back to sex, because otherwise we are going to incentivize really risky permanent surgeries and body modifications for people who just really want to be true and real and accepted.
Right.
There, people suggest like, oh, the way to get the predatory AGPs, like the ones you're talking about, like the person who raped you, the way to get these people out is like, well, we're gonna require bottom surgery or something for anyone to enter a women's space. And it's like, well, no, because I don't want to be incentivizing people to get bottom surgery who don't need bottom surgery. Like, that's a really serious thing, and people shouldn't do it to gain access to bathrooms, right? And it doesn't mean that they want access to bathrooms to hurt people. It means that they want to live as a woman, and if that's how the other trans women get in, they're going to do that same thing. And I think that sets up a really messy incentive structure. And I do wish, like, your journey is complicated, and obviously I'm only meeting you now, but I think the best place to end up is just living in reality, right? Like all the complex realities of where you're at. You are a female and you've been on testosterone and you're masculinized. So in some places, you're going to be read as the man in a female space, and you're going to need to act appropriately, right? And like just kind of living in the reality of all of this, I think is all I can kind of hope for the movement going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it's really unhealthy for trans people to like delude ourselves into thinking that we can become the opposite sex. I think that narrative personally harmed me, thinking that I had to become the opposite sex to be a real trans person. And once I let go of that delusion that I'm a male brain trapped in the wrong body, I really just started, I don't know, I can't, when I tell other people, trans people this, they get upset. I'm like, I truly started feeling better when I just accepted that I'm female. They hate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Same thing happened for me. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's, it's like, I feel like why can't we have both? Why can't I be a female who in some cases socially acts as a man, socially identifies with men more. Sometimes I get called sir when I walk in the store. Most of the time I get called sir and he, him in public. I've stealthed at a job for a year. Like, all my documents say male because I really committed for a little bit. Like, it's like, why can't I be a female who medicalized and also be a female who wants to call myself he, him sometimes, or call myself sir? Like, it doesn't, I think both of these things can be held at the same time, and that I'm just truly the most moderate of the situation. I think people need to meet in the middle here, like especially trans people will need to let go of really trying to push that we are the opposite sex.
Yep.
Yeah.
What recently you obviously, like Tyler just mentioned, you were at the start that you were recently on Phil's show. I'm not sure that it's going to be, if it's available yet publicly, but that will be available soon.
So.
But yeah, we got advanced access of it because obviously
just
it's right up our,
yeah,
right up our alley, of course. But you were it sounds like from your experience, like in the trans porn sphere, that most MTFs, or excuse me, I'm sorry, most FTMs, to your knowledge, seem to have that same experience where they are kind of eroticizing their own hybrid bodies rather than actually desiring to be male. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to switch gears right into the sexuality part of this.
Cool.
Yeah, so oh man, I've slept with over 100 FTMs. So I just stopped counting. I'm just giving, that's a rough number, right? So gosh, I've been to leather Dyke parties, and it's funny because there's so many, most of us are like riding the cusp of what is a man and what is a butch. And I like to write a lot about butch as a gender, as being a female man. And a lot of these people totally eroticize exactly that. They love being a man with a pussy. There's a few different categories of this. I've noticed there's the really masculine guys who like to get really hairy and really buff, but are gay bottoms fully. And then I've noticed actually the more non-binary, feminine, butch ones like myself are actually into women. So the hyper-masc ones who like really sexualize the bonus hole love men. And the stone butch tops are doing strap-on culture. We're doing butch femme. And this pattern just keeps proving itself true. And I often, the really masculine buff guys don't want to sleep with me because I call myself a lesbian. But sometimes they will. And it's funny because we are totally eroticizing and fetishizing the masculinity. We're touching each other's muscles. We're touching each other's flat chest. We're comparing our bottom growth. We're smelling each other's armpits because we like the testosterone smell. Like, it's fully about it's like looking in a mirror. It feels so autosexual. Like, what I eroticize about another trans man is what he has that I have. And we're doing that to each other, right? Like, when I'm dating or having sex with an early transition trans man, I like to be like, oh, you're getting so hairy. Oh, your bottom growth is getting so big. And they get really excited by fetishizing the masculinization.
Okay, so this is fascinating to me because I've like been in like FTM spaces, more like online stuff, like there's getting support and resource sharing and, that kind of stuff. I've said before, I'm quite low libido. So I think a lot of cases I'm kind of in the dark about the more sexual aspects of this that aren't because again, I'm looking more in the kind of just general lifestyle questions, general relationship questions, things like that. But what I've noticed is that so much of like MTF culture is about eroticizing the transformation. And I wasn't like, I had not seen that in FTM culture, like eroticizing like the process of masculinization. And it sounds like from what you're saying that's absolutely there, that does exist.
Oh okay. Yeah, I've made and sold videos to other trans men of me and another trans mask just lifting weights and then touching each other's muscles and touching our sweat. And that's the entire video. I've sold over 50 copies of a video where I'm just showing off my armpit and my body hair to other trans men. So it's fascinating. Like a lot of I wanted to say like 70% of my clients when I returned to queer porn were trans and queer people, and 30% were like weird straight guys, right? But the chasers, which is a whole nother thing.
Probably just AGPs.
Huh?
Probably just AGPs.
Oh, AGPs love me. They eat me up. Let me tell you right now, it's like my number one clientele.
Yeah, checks out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably both before and after transition, even when you were,
Right.
you know.
Right. The dominatrix
high
thing and the trans men
femdom
thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've made so much money off of pegging. That was like my number. If you used to search like goth girl pegging, I was the first page.
Yeah. So this brings up a lot of interesting questions, and these are questions that Aaron and I have been fielding a lot lately. We'll have to have another episode just so I can vent about everyone on the internet. But there are people who maintain. There's Aaron sort of getting at this distinction potentially in FTMs, in females who are identifying as trans and maybe also socially and medically transitioning, and the question of ROGD versus autoandrophilia. And the question that I think a lot of people have, and a lot of people for good reason, is like, okay, but how do we know kind of like when this started, you know, and like what came first, the trend? Because we know that even just taking on a trans identity can cause dysphoria, which you've attested to, and a lot of people have. Basically, like once the idea, the possibility is presented, then I would think that was Aaron's experience in a large part too. So I think the feedback that a lot of people will give to Aaron and I is like, well, any sexual behavior of an FTM is basically can be attributed to the fact that they are dosing on testosterone, right? And so they'll say this is going to make these women, they'll say this is going to make these females basically like reduce their inhibitions, and they're going to be engaging in all types of reckless sex that they wouldn't have done prior. You present an interesting case because a lot of these sexual feelings were present for you. Sexual feelings and behaviors were present for you before you transitioned. But then, so I wonder, like, what's your impression of the other people in the scene too? Because again, people are going to want to say, well, okay, maybe Frankie this is what we're already seeing with the gender criticals online. It's like AGP and AAP doesn't exist, except Frankie's the only true female paraphile because you're open and honest about it.
Don't worry, I'm the only one as well. So
I'll wear that.
Yeah. So like, what's your read of the other females who were, for whom this was like very erotic?
I think that I totally believe in the butch lesbian to AAP pipeline because I've just observed it a lot. That kind of happened to me, except I've had this pseudo bisexuality. I totally agree with the term pseudo bisexuality because my attraction to males has always been really confusing and conflicting and something that I've been like grappling with. Until I realized that the only men I've ever been attracted to were men I really wanted to look like. And I've found also that I'm like pretty phallophobic now, which I think is something that a lot of us develop later. That's a whole nother thing. I used to also wear the crown of most misandrist trans man, but now I'm most paraphilic. So I do notice that the ones who were straight women before, I don't want to say it's ROGD. I really don't. Because when I talk to them, they really have AHE. They really express really wanting to be a gay man, watching RuPaul's Drag Race, being a fag hag, stuff like that. They just really, they're like, oh, I always felt like a gay boy inside. Or a lot of them will say, I wish I was a trans woman. They'll say, oh, when I was presenting as a woman, I wanted to be a trans woman. And I'm like, well, so you wanted to have a penis? And then, yes, they do. They do want to have a penis. And then, the butches, a lot of us, I feel like the trans mask butches, there's a lot of butch people on T. There's a lot of butches that I know in my local community who have top surgery but no testosterone. And I think that is the autoandro gynomorphophilia showing up. Because I can tell a lot of them too also grapple with this like fighting with being a little attracted to men, because we do a lot of butch for butch. It's a lot of us will do exclusively butch for butch or butch for femme. And like, that's it. And that just feels so autosexual.
Yeah, we Aaron and I, and we're not the first people, but we've talked about this too. Like, where does butch for butch come from? And just this idea, yeah, it does sound very autosexual, like you're saying. When I understand from listening to your conversation with Phil that you are skeptical of the ROGD hypothesis, and that's fair. When you're describing the people for whom, like, you kind of pause to say you don't think this would be the proper term and you think AHE would be a more proper term, that makes sense to me. And some of the things you said, I could see some of that still being what I would consider ROGD. Like, I love RuPaul's Drag Race, and like, I love, gay culture, and gay culture is very just like feminine culture, like, so like, it makes sense to me that like, someone could confuse that, especially if you like are in a queer environment and stuff like that. But the wanting to be a trans woman, that to me is like a dead giveaway, because I also know like AGP presentations of people who like want to be FTMs. So that's really interesting. And so that makes sense to me. I think ROGD is very useful and very imprecise, and people use it in different ways. So I think like where ROGD makes sense as like almost a diagnosis, even though again that's the wrong term, is kind of at the initial phenomenon that Lisa Lippman was describing, which was like this clustering. Like, you would have these groups of friends of young girls, right, who were spending a bunch of time online and then like coming out together, right, and transitioning and socially transitioning together. And there was this very salient social component to it. But I think there's the reality is like ROGD actually makes sense to describing a lot of autosexual transition too, which is like, I've been saying this, and Ray Williams just posted something about this the other day, like rapid onset autogynephilic gender dysphoria, which is like, we're living in a culture that is like pro-trans, that the possibilities are just there, that you're more likely to encounter someone like this. And so it definitely is really speeding up a process that may have just a few decades ago spread over 50 years of someone's life, like Caitlyn Jenner or something, right? Where they would have gone through these waves of wanting to do this thing, but no, that's so crazy and it'll ruin my life. And I'll take some estrogen, but I know I need to stop. I can't keep doing this with the kids in the house, right? Like, whereas this whole journey kind of gets really sped up and rapidly manifest, basically. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't think like I'm not, I do think that there are, or rather that a better term for what maybe people mean when they're saying ROGD is like ideological transitioners. And I think that's what Aaron feels like he has a lot of experience kind of identifying, which is, and some of these people really don't medicalize, although some will, to prove their bona fides and things like that, even if they don't really take efforts to to masculinize their aesthetic or personality, they will medicalize, they will go on testosterone. But there are people for whom it seems like taking on a queer identity, taking on, you know, she, they, something like this is a political identity and statement. And so I think that is just like, that just feels, that just is true, right? Like we can all name people in our lives like this, even people who just like they don't medicalize at all. Like the amount of just like she, they people that I know who were in my like PhD program, right? These are just like highfalutin people who are signaling that they are like evolved and also oppressed and like
the pronouns are virtue signaling, right? I noticed a lot of queer femmes will throw a they in there just so you know they're queer, because otherwise it's just a she, her. Oh no, I'm a straight girl, don't want that. That's so embarrassing, isn't it? Are a lot of them
that can't be undermined, right? Just how actually shitty it feels to be a boring straight girl, especially if all your friends are something, and it doesn't even mean that they're lying, right? But like they don't feel like a bad person, and a straight white cis girl is a bad person. That's the Karen, that's the this, right? And so they're not like lying so much as they are
personally victimized by she, theys being stupid, transphobic and homophobic to me. Like for real, they will put the they in there to quickly cover up how transphobic they actually are. And I've seen this in my physical community. We called out this one dominatrix for being like just so transphobic.
What does transphobic mean to you? Not to nitpick, but I just it's a loaded term.
It is. I know it gets thrown around a lot. It means so many things, right? So she would be like, transphobic in the 2024 definition of she called all trans women fetishistic men, and people really didn't like that. So she put a they in her bio, and now it's okay. Yeah. she just kind of like covered up real quick. Or she came out as gender fluid in the backlash, actually, I think. But she's
that's good PR.
Yeah. So I can't say it doesn't happen, because it does, right? It totally happens. There are like, just like political lesbianism, there are people who are politically non-binary. I mean, these people, they view gender as political. So they say, oh, I'm not a woman because I don't identify with traditional womanhood, because I don't want to be a 1950s housewife. So I'm going to put on they, them pronouns to signal that I don't gender conform or whatever. But then they're perfectly gender conforming, aren't they? And, you know, that's why I really argue that in a really roundabout way, that pronouns do not reflect someone's gender. Pronouns really don't reflect someone's gender. Anyone can use any pronouns at any time, and it actually doesn't mean anything, truly.
Yeah, for sure.
Pronouns, pronouns just it just means like what most people see, sex most people see when they look at you. That's like what pronouns usually are, with the exception of if you really don't pass, the people in your life who are agreeing to use something else for you to be polite. But yeah, like that's that, and that's why kind of going back to a conversation we had earlier here, you can't spend your life in denial and believing that you're going to achieve being the opposite sex, because even if you get rid of all the bigots in the world and the people who are going to want to quote unquote misgender you just to hurt you, just to spite you, just to remind you of your sex, there are also going to be good people who get it wrong, because most trans people don't pass 100% or 100% of the time. And so you're just setting yourself up for failure, you know, if it's going to ruin you every time someone sees your sex. Yeah,
it became really mentally damaging for me to, like, every time someone misgendered me, to felt like I failed. It's like, oh, someone clocked me, I'm a failure, my transition's a failure, I'm fake trans, I'm not a real man. And it makes you do this mental spiral of beating yourself up when you get clocked. And then all the other people in the trans community encourage this mental spiral. Oh no, I can't believe you got misgendered. That's so bad. And then encourage, oh, you're right. It's like, no, honey, you look like a male and you need to accept that you look like a male, and people are going to call you he, him because that's what that's what they perceive you as. And not everyone has to affirm your gender. I don't need my gender affirmed. And, like a lot of other like non-binary, quote, non-binary people like me, like no one can see my gender when they look at me. Everyone genders me differently. I can, in the same store, get called sir by one group and then ma'am by another group. Because I live in San Francisco, I get called they, them constantly because people can't fucking tell when they look at me. Like, yeah, like I've been threatened at a bus stop because someone couldn't tell what sex I was, right? So it just like shit like that. A lot of trans people need to grow a spine with when people clock your sex, because it's just like you're gonna be making yourself upset every single day. Every single day, you're just gonna keep making yourself upset, and then affirming that it's right to be upset, and like really solidifying this mental pathway of really just hating your sex.
Yeah.
And they just, it like what you were describing when, like they rally around to support the other, when really you're kind of they're cementing this really kind of toxic view that people who don't see you the way you want them to see you are bigoted in some way. And then it's like this constant sense of, being victimized. And that's certainly not a mentally healthy way to live. But back to the whole ROGD thing, it's been really kind of convoluted for me recently with this whole AA-GAMP, however you want to say this, realization, because I was like, well, if they don't want to be men, if they want to be trans, then that's obviously ROGD, right? But now, with the knowledge that no, a lot of them are actually autosexually attracted to being trans men, and therefore there's going to be a significantly, there's a significant number who are their verbiage is going to be everything in line with what I would have assumed to be the ROGD classification, because they're not literally wanting to be biologically male. So that is quite a conundrum. But I still think that there are a not insignificant number of people who are for whom there is no autosexual element. There is no the people who are going to be neurotypical. I don't know if Frankie, if you're familiar with this part of our theory, is that autosexuality corresponds a lot with autism spectrum broad phenotype, let's say. We're getting a lot of trouble lately.
Asperger's, high functioning neurodivergence. I'm never using the AUTISM word again. I made a promise, and I'm just done with it. But we think there's a correlation at play, and I think Aaron specifically thinks that they sort of come from the same mechanism. Not that the A word causes autosexuality or vice versa, but that whatever that mechanism is responsible for sort of both.
I feel like I have a really interesting take on this that's probably just super pseudoscientific, but I feel like just like how we know that paraphilias cluster and certain mental illnesses cluster, I feel like maybe whatever makes us neurotypical, whatever weird different wiring we have, makes us more likely to be gender nonconforming and more likely to be autistic in the same. Somehow it feels like it is all definitely connected, is what I'm trying to say. And I just don't know how these wires are getting crossed that is making these things happen, but it does seem like there's something going on.
Right. And that's what I'm thinking, that for the ones who don't seem to be autosexual, who seem like the trans identification was a direct result of subconsciously realizing that there is a social incentive to be trans, I think those are the ones who are, it's not going to be connected to autosexuality, and therefore they actually might fit the rapid onset as we understand it. But again, I think ideological or social trans identification is more useful.
Well, there's another subpopulation of ROGD that you're leaving out, Aaron, which I think I feel like Abigail Schreier gets at this in her book too, because you're right. There are the people for whom it seems like we were saying, sort of the political trans, or like they see some type of social benefit that they can confer by taking on a marginalized identity. And as Abigail Schreier says, you can't change your race. It can be hard to fake a sexual orientation, right? But you can say you're trans, and according to trans rules, you actually don't have to do anything to even prove that you're trans, unless you end up in a trans med group of friends, right? But if you stay, in the broad trans world, then actually just asserting the identity is enough. So that population, I think, exists. But there's another population which is really distressed people, who are reaching into the symptom pool and making sense of their distress via gender dysphoria, especially because that term is really nebulous, and because it's like, and because of the high comorbidity of these mental illnesses, as you said, Frankie, it's like you see this trans person online talking about how they used to be so depressed and so anxious and all of these things, and you think that you're just like them and trans because you're also anxious and depressed and all of these things, right? You have real suffering, and you're trying to make sense of that through again, the symptom pool, this idea that like you communicate your distress using terms that other people understand. You communicate your distress using terms that people are going to take seriously and act upon. And people take seriously and act upon gender dysphoria. I think that, and so I have sympathy for the, like I have sympathy for most people in this conversation. But yeah, I think not everyone is just like trying to social climb, for lack of better terms, with a trans identity. A lot of people are just struggling through adolescence.
I mean, the argument against that is it's not actually socially beneficial to be trans. There are really, really small pockets here in San Francisco where there are some girls who just wear they them pronouns to be woke or whatever you want to say. I feel like I partially agree with the ROGD thing, but I don't think these girls who are changing pronouns, I don't think they're dysphoric. They're just not. I feel like calling it ROGD doesn't make sense. And I feel like
some of them get dysphoric when they start taking on the trans identity. And that just, to me, again, makes sense, and I believe them, and they'll even admit as much, especially the ones who detransition. Like, basically, like, right, the distress I was feeling wasn't quote unquote gender dysphoria until I was taking on a trans identity, and now suddenly my body actually didn't align with my gender, right? And now there was this mismatch. Let me level with you for a second, Frankie, because I really do hear what you're saying, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, and it's actually a point that Aaron and I have kind of made before. You're right. Like, it's not actually, living as a trans person is not actually an easy thing. It's not like, being a trans person is not opening all doors for you. No. I would say on the day to day. So there's kind of two things happening here, right? Being a trans person might make your experience on the bus harder, might make your experience going into the restaurant harder, and your experience going into the store harder, and your experience finding a partner harder. It does confer political social status. It might make your search for certain types of jobs easier, depending on your competency level, And again, this is just true, and it falls under the broader framework of DEI. And the same is true for just any queer identity, really. And this is something, again, I'm just like, I used to be very woke, and I'm just not anymore. So I think I see these things as just obviously true. My wife and I get opportunities that we take advantage of because we are a queer couple, to promote our stuff and whatever. That are given out. They confer special status on us because we're a queer mixed race couple, and that gets you diversity points. So to ignore that, I think is disingenuous, but also to ignore your point, which is very true, is also disingenuous. Like, it's not just like, it's not easy to be a trans person in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's not. And I think there's another piece of the puzzle here that I've observed, that for a lot of these non-medicalizing they-thems, female they-thems, they actually find it's more socially beneficial to present as a woman. It is more socially beneficial to not cut your tits off, because don't you want a man to pay for your date? Don't you want that position? Don't you want to get hired as the barista because you're a cute girl? I've noticed a very interesting subsect of people who won't transition because you socially get knocked down. And I can attest that being a hot girl was way better. Being a hot lesbian gave me way more opportunities than being a white guy. So that's partially why I'm constantly like, hey, I'm trans, because otherwise I've transitioned to something that fucking sucks, right? A straight white guy. That is bad.
So you're basically, you're kind of like, it's more socially beneficial to be trans than to be a straight white guy.
I guess
right?
so. Yeah, that's true. Yes, I am confirming that. But
it's complicated.
In this roundabout, complicated way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I think you're right. Actually, I think you're more likely to get hired at the coffee shop as a barista, being a normal gender conform. I hate all this stupid whatever. Like, I might have an easier time, let's say, getting hired as a barista than you would, Frankie. But again, big but, you might have an easier time, getting into the corporate job, right? Because they're specifically looking to diversify their, based on literally just trying to fill quotas, right? Which isn't a good way to do anything either. But I think too, though, like what you said, there are people who won't transition for that reason. I think that's a good. If you're not gonna, if you don't, that's good. That's good. If it feels like too much, you'd be giving up too much to medicalize, then you probably shouldn't. Then they're probably not a good fit for medicalization. Yeah. Seems like that's good. I'm happy with that. Which is the same with again the trans women who are like, in order to be taken seriously, every person who identifies as a trans woman needs to sign a pledge to go on HRT. It's like, well, no, because they don't all need to medicalize. Like
no, they don't.
They shouldn't go into women's spaces, but no, you shouldn't need to do certain medical steps to have this thing, which is just a self-proclaimed identity anyway. I know that hurts. That hurts. It hurts people with crippling dysphoria to be compared to people without crippling dysphoria and all using the same name. But at a certain point, everyone just needs to let go a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they make their dysphoria sacred and untouchable. You cannot challenge it. If I have dysphoria and you say, oh, it's because of this, or maybe you're not a good candidate for that actual surgery to help that dysphoria, they have a fucking meltdown. I've had a few cis woman chasers who, after they started dating me, would be like, I want to be they them, or I want top surgery, or I want testosterone. And it's fucking horrifying and makes me break up with them. After the first one, it was very interesting. He started taking testosterone after dating me, but this was a cis woman when we started dating because I wanted a girlfriend. Right. But as he watched me masculinize, as he watched the testosterone work for me, as he got really obsessed with my bottom growth again, the sexual element, let's bring it back to, he really wanted bottom growth. He really wanted the sexual arousal aspects, even just, I don't know. It was very interesting. Maybe he did have ROGD because of me, because of dating me. And he's still a trans man to this day, which I think is also very interesting because I was literally making bets with our friend group on when he would detrans, but he's still trans man. So, hey.
We were talking offline. I think there is very much we joke a lot about in the sphere, the trans woman whose boyfriend ends up transitioning and being to be the girlfriend, because again, it is AGPs who seek out relationships with trans women. And Frankie, we were talking offline about how that same thing seems to happen in lesbian relation, or not that's the wrong word, but like in relationships where it's like, yeah, a trans man and a
woman.
Yeah. Lack of better words. Yeah. Now that is the only word. Yeah. Yeah. The woman is seeking out the trans man because of kind of, it could be entirely subconscious, but she is attracted to the trans man for the same reason the chaser, the Gamp chaser is attracted to the trans woman. It is like this autosexual thing.
Yeah,
and
she started putting on my binder and getting aroused by that. She wanted to wear my strap on. She wanted my testosterone. And I was like, well, that's mine. You need to get your own prescribed.
And see, that feels like ROGD is the wrong word, but I think another way to say ROGD, which I think is what I mean a lot of the time, is like, wouldn't have transitioned 50 years ago, basically, or 30 years ago even. It's like if we weren't living in a time where it really was just so easy and just so it's like I keep going back, of course it's still stigmatized. Like this idea that people would rather have a trans kid than a gay kid, so it doesn't make sense to Aaron and I either, like it's not like, right, that it's a lie to say that it's somehow like less stigmatized to be trans than gay or something like that. But yeah, I think like there are a lot of people who wouldn't have changed their lives so dramatically in a different era if it weren't just so available. But what you're describing, someone like putting on your binder and getting aroused, that doesn't sound, that's not ROGD by any like definition that anyone is using, really. I have like, this is gonna be beyond what we're gonna be able to cover here. Maybe we'll have you back again, Frankie, but Aaron and I are definitely gonna need to flesh this out more, of this like partial AAP. And it's some of the same questions that I have about AGAP or partial AGP, which is like, there's a chicken and an egg question. There might even be like basically well, I guess it is some type of like auto sexuality if they have the desire to do it to themselves. But basically, like if we're following the framework that AAP and AGP works under, the erotic target identity inversion, the attraction to the other has to come first. And it's not clear to me that everyone that we would be calling AAGMP, their first and primary attraction is to trans men, and I do think what manifests as AAGMP and even potentially as AGAMP can be downstream of AAP and AGP. And sometimes like, it's not even like a cope. It's just like it's like when you're in the process then, and you are sort of like eroticizing different things and whatever, it's like you might become like really into I'm not articulating myself as well as I would like to right now.
I think I see what you're saying. Like I feel like yeah, maybe first it's the AAP, and then that can develop into the AAGMP. I feel like that might be true for my situation. I feel like it's all just different expressions of autosexuality, because I feel like at its core, that woman I was dating who started getting aroused by wearing my binder is an autosexual. I don't know in which way or how far she ended up going with her transition, but this is a person who, at the end of the day, is getting aroused by herself. Like I have autosexual masturbation rituals just like an AGP would. I like to inject my testosterone, wait for it to kick in, takes about 2 hours, lift weights, get really sweaty, feel really pumped, and then I have a mirror right next to my bed because I'm an autosexual.
In the very literal sense.
So there's a lot of people like me who we are jerking off in the mirror. you know? So I feel like that's something to be examined, right? It doesn't matter if we call ourselves a trans mask or a butch or a FTM. At the end of the day, getting off to ourselves.
Yep.
Well, and then
the phenomenon itself is what matters, not what label we argue about to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tally.
Well, and then there's and I'm getting all like coy and shy now, but then there's like the people like me who I'm like when you were talking earlier, I'm just like, do I want to say how much I resonate with everything you're saying right now? Just because people are like really kind of looking for shit to whatever. People are angry with us on the internet, and so I feel like I shouldn't be giving people ammunition, but here I go anyway.
No, I'm all blushing talking about my stuff.
So like, I mean, so then there's the people like me who there's no cross-sex, there's no cross-sex issues for me at all. It's very much the femaleness and the femininity that I eroticize, but like I relate to so much of what you're saying of like, like the best sex, ideal sex for me would be to have a mirror there next to me. My very early, like right when puberty hit and my sexual awakening happened, I was online on MySpace, meeting older people. I wasn't pretending to be a man, but I was pretending to be a woman, basically, not a young girl. You know, I was pretending to be a woman, and I was taking pictures of myself that I was sharing with other people and mostly strangers on the internet, but I was taking it to watch back for myself. It's like really about me. Yeah. And that's where I think
it is.
I was talking about this on like a Twitter space the other day. I don't know what to do with my type of autosexuality or AAP in males because it's easy to call it auto-homosexuality, and that pairs nicely, like semantically, with auto-heterosexuality. But it doesn't feel entirely true because if we're following the same framework of ETII, that would mean that I started as a true blue, authentic homosexual, and that inverted back on me. And that's why I'm attracted to myself as a woman, because of my attraction to other women. When, if anything, my attraction to other women feels wrapped up in my attraction to myself, and not the other way around. And so I don't know. And this is something that we've kind of struggled with from the beginning of this show, The Navel Gaze. And this was even when we started, I had, I'm always fine tuning my understanding of all of this. But it's like ETII is an extraordinarily compelling framework for this identity. Well, maybe that is the key here. I don't have an identity inversion because because there is no cross-sex identity or cross-species or cross-race or cross-able identity for me. So I don't have the dysphoria. I don't get the distress or any of that. But there does seem to be this autosexuality that is sort of separate from the ETII or under the same umbrella, right? Of people who their sexuality is just very much about them. And maybe like Aaron said, or other people hypothesize that sort of everyone, let's say, has this sort of balance of autosexuality and allosexuality, and that it's the people like us are just more extreme on the auto side. But yeah, this like you're saying, like there's just like, it's interesting how I related so much to what you were saying, and I had that same feeling of like, wow, I relate a lot to what a lot of these autogynephilic males are saying about their sexuality. And then I had autogynephilic males saying to me, wow, Tali, I relate to what you said about your sexuality. And so there is there about this autosexual mechanism, sexuality. I don't know how to classify it. I don't care how people classify it, really. Well, I care, but it's not as important as describing the subjective experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally really pushing for autosexual being brought into the public eye and being normalized. Like maybe the A should mean autosexual.
Well, especially I think it already does.
Does it really?
I thought
no, it'd be asexual, but the asexuals are autosexuals who are analoerotic, because that's my hot take.
Okay.
Well, the asexuals are, they're either, not all of them, obviously. I think they're probably people who are just low sex drive, but I think low sex drive people aren't taking on a queer identity of asexual and waving a rainbow flag. It's other types of asexuals who want to, you know what I mean? Who's joining Yeah. Okay, so that was a joke, but kind of serious.
No, there's something going on there with asexuals who want to join the queer community who are not like same-sex romantic attracted. But that's gonna get me burnt at the stake. I refuse to talk about asexuals.
Well, Frankie, you might already be screwed. If you're trying to remain, I'm glad to have you on here because, again, I feel like you still have one foot in the door of the queer community. But you spoke to the Antichrist, Phil Illy, who's trying to make AGP. He's the AGP truther, right? That's not going to win you any choice. And Aaron and I are like, we're certified gender criticals. I mean, we're in hot water with a lot of gender criticals lately, but I like, most things we say piss off trans people who have not peaked in some way in this conversation. Like, we would be absolutely an unacceptable watch for most people in the queer community.
I find that's so fascinating because I've just found sexology and the concept of being an AAP to make so much sense for me and just feel way better. I think what it comes down to is the stigmatization. Like when trans people have confronted me recently about, hey, why are you pushing this autosexual thing that doesn't look good? That's always what they say is it doesn't look good, right? And it's like, why are you confirming this transphobic narrative that we're fetishizing?
Sorry, I have to interrupt because this is what the lesbians keep telling me when I'm saying that all these butch lesbians are AAPs, and they're saying, stop saying this, it doesn't look good. Why are you saying this? It doesn't look good.
This is what the gay men, this is what the gay ultras are also saying. Yeah, stop saying that gay GP and all these things are a thing. It doesn't look good for us. Yeah.
It does. And that's the thing. I have never cared to make other people feel comfy-wumpy. So that's why I'm like, I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable. And that's why I keep saying the word paraphilia, because I know every time I say the word paraphilia, it makes their skin crawl. And they really don't want me to, but for me, I think that the same, being a homosexual and being an autosexual should be completely equal. And they really fucking hate that. And that's why they do backlash. But when I explain to trans people this thought process, they kind of get it. They kind of get on board. They're like, oh, you're trying to prove that it's a sexuality so that way it's equal. I'm like, yeah, I'm not over here trying to prove that fucking we're the same as zoophiles. I'm trying to prove that we're the same as homosexuals.
Yeah, no, people don't like that. And people are not going to like that you just said that. And again, like, I'm okay. To me, it's like, I don't care. Like, people even to like a lot of the ultra pushback is like, well, if you normalize this, then you're gonna have these autosexuals trying to get gay rights. And it's like, gay rights don't exist. We all have the same equal protection rights in this country. No, literally, they don't exist. Like, I don't know what you mean. A person, an autosexual already can't be discriminated against for the same reasons that a gay person can't be discriminated against on the basis of their sexuality. And it would like so rarely come up. And again, the thing is like, I am pushing for destigmatization and normalization. I don't care if people consider it just like homosexuality or not. I really don't care. And it's different from homosexuality, especially because autosexuality for a lot of people also has the allosexual component. So like a large part of my sexuality is myself. But I'm interested in other people, and I'm especially interested in relationships with other people, and bonding with other people and all of that. And so, like, I'm okay if we don't just like, it doesn't need to be the same thing as homosexuality. But I think a lot of these people seem to be fucking up their own goals here. If the goal is to minimize unnecessary medicalization, then we should be telling these young people with these feelings, not young like fucking 6, but young like, I don't know, the 18-year-olds. I don't really care. Whatever. I want the information to be available for people who are having these feelings, that their only two options are not, I'm actually born in the wrong body, or I'm a dirty, disgusting pervert, paraphile, whatever. Right. You want there to be a middle ground, just like, hey, you're probably autosexual. It looks like this and that. Any of this relate to you? Cool. This means with this information, here's what to do.
I
Anything,
think-
nothing to medicalization, you know, because that's important too. Is like there are autosexuals who are going to be completely fine not medicalizing.
Yeah, I agree that I don't think people considering transition can actually make an informed decision without being aware of autosexuality. Because if I was aware of this when I started transitioning, I wouldn't have gone full throttle with tea. You know, I took more tea than I really realistically needed to. So yeah, I think it is important. I think you presenting it in a neutral way is awesome, where you're not saying this is a dirty fetishistic freak, and you're not encouraging the medicalization either. I think presenting it in a fully neutral way is gonna actually just benefit trans people. That's why I'm not gonna shut up about it.
Right. Knowing true things about yourself is better than believing lies about yourself that could essentially, be quite medically dangerous in certain contexts. Sorry about my dogs. I'll mute.
It's okay.
Oh, but actually, we do have to wrap up. I know we've got
Yeah,
really yelling. Okay. Any last pressing thoughts? Anybody wants to talk about? Sorry.
Hazel, shut up.
I don't think I have any finishing thoughts. I hope I answered your questions. I'd like to talk more for sure another time. If you give me some prompts, I can do a little more research on the community here. I feel like I have a really good insight because I still attend leather deck parties. I can still observe these people. So definitely let me know.
It could be a correspondent. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and I really do.
We'll call in our leather correspondent, Frankie.
Our leather deck correspondent. Yeah, no, I really want to talk about that subculture because I was talking recently in our little group of the neo-Blanchardians or whatever you want to call us about like you see all this like the leather fetishes in gay men and the latex or nylon fetishes of AGP, but I was like, I don't see actual females fetishizing materials, and then you show up and you're like, oh no,
yes we are. Yes we are.
Yeah, I would love to dig into that sometime, and yeah, very curious now.
Okay, great. Yeah, happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Talk to both of you.
Happy New
Can't
Year.
wait for my Phil Lilly podcast to come out in a few days. So
yes, we're excited as well. Thank you so much, Frankie. This was awesome.
all right, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.